The first person to ask if I could temporarily give up my house was my mother. The second was my older brother. The third was my ex-wife, who had no legal reason to know my address. All three of them showed up on the same Sunday carrying boxes. I was standing in my driveway, with a garden hose in one hand when my mother stepped out of my brother's SUV and said, "Don't make this harder than it has to be." Behind her, my brother started unloading suitcases. My ex-wife stayed in the passenger seat, watching me through the windshield, like she was waiting to see whether I'd embarrass myself. They had apparently decided that the 3-bedroom house I'd spent 2 years saving for was now a family resource. My brother needed somewhere to stay after losing his apartment. My ex-wife needed a fresh start. My parents had agreed I was being selfish by living alone. Nobody asked me. They just arrived. I turned off the hose, looked at the pile of luggage on my lawn, and said, "Put everything back in the car." My mother laughed like I'd made a bad joke. My brother kept carrying boxes. My ex-wife finally opened the passenger door. That was when I understood they weren't there to ask permission. They thought they already had it. 2 years earlier, that probably would have worked. Back then, I was the person everyone called when something broke, when rent was late, when a car wouldn't start, or when somebody needed money they promised to return. I was 35 and worked as an electrical supervisor for a packaging plant outside Dayton, Ohio. The job wasn't exciting, but it paid well, and I was good at it. I liked systems that made sense. Power went in. Equipment ran. When it didn't, there was always a reason. People weren't like that. People could take from you for years and still act offended the first time you stopped giving. My ex-wife's name was Rachel. We'd been married for 7 years. Most of those years were ordinary, in a way I once thought meant successful. We rented a small house in Kettering, split the bills, hosted family cookouts, and talked about buying a place when the market calmed down. It never calmed down. Neither did Rachel. About a year before our divorce, she started complaining that our life felt too small. She wanted trips, better furniture, a newer SUV, restaurants where the menu didn't list prices. I wasn't against any of that. I just wanted to pay off debt first. Rachel heard that as no. Her favorite sentence became, "We only get one life," usually right before buying something we couldn't afford. The first real problem came when I found out she'd opened a credit card in both our names. The balance was just under $11,000. When I asked what she'd bought, she said mostly household expenses. The statement showed clothes, weekend hotels, salon visits, and charges from bars I'd never been to. There were also repeated payments to a man named Colin Mercer. Rachel said he was a fitness coach. He turned out to be a sales manager at a car dealership. I learned that because my cousin saw them together at a brewery on a Tuesday afternoon when Rachel had told me she was helping her mother after a doctor's appointment. When I confronted her, she didn't deny meeting him. She denied that meeting him meant anything. "He understands what I'm trying to do with my life," she said. "What are you trying to do?" "Grow." Apparently, growth required secret lunches and joint debt. I moved into the spare bedroom. Rachel told everyone I was emotionally unavailable. My mother called and said marriage took patience. My father said men sometimes had to absorb more to keep a family together. My brother Jason said I should stop checking Rachel's spending because controlling money was abusive. That was interesting coming from a man who still owed me $4,000. I should explain Jason. He was 3 years older than me and had spent most of his adult life one emergency away from stability. Jobs ended unfairly. Landlords were unreasonable, cars were lemons. Girlfriends were crazy. Nothing was ever his fault. paid his deposit on 2 apartments, fixed 3 of his cars, and covered 6 months of child support when he was between jobs. Every time, he promised it was the last time. Every time, my parents reminded me that family helped family. Then my marriage collapsed, and suddenly, nobody had room for me. Rachel filed for divorce after I refused to refinance our rental debt into a personal loan. She told people I had abandoned the relationship. Her affair with Colin became official 3 weeks later, which was convenient timing if you ignored the previous 8 months. The divorce itself wasn't dramatic. There wasn't much to divide besides debt, furniture, and 2 cars. Rachel kept the newer SUV. I kept my truck. She kept most of the furniture because she claimed I didn't care about decor. I kept the credit card balance because my attorney said fighting it would cost nearly as much as paying it. That one stayed with me. Not the money. The fact that she created the debt, then walked away calling it part of our shared history. I spent the first 3 months after the divorce renting a room from a coworker named Leon. He never asked for details. He cleared out half his garage so I could store my tools, gave me a key, and charged me less than he could have. That was the most support anyone gave me. My parents called twice during that period. Both times to ask whether I'd reconsidered signing Rachel's car refinance paperwork. Jason called once. He needed $800. When I said no, he went quiet. "You're really changing, man." That was supposed to make me feel guilty. Instead, it felt accurate. I stopped answering most family calls after that. I worked. Then I worked more. The plant offered weekend overtime because they were replacing an old conveyor line. I took every shift I could get. I repaired generators on the side, installed ceiling fans, rewired garages. Nothing glamorous, just steady work. I paid off the divorce debt in 14 months. Then I kept saving. The house came almost by accident. A retired maintenance manager from the plant was selling a small brick ranch in Huber Heights. 3 bedrooms, 1.5 bathrooms, unfinished basement, detached garage. The kitchen looked like it had stopped updating around 1997. I loved it immediately. The garage had its own electrical panel. That mattered more to me than granite counters. I made an offer. He accepted. For the first time in my life, I owned something nobody else had signed for, contributed to, or could claim they deserved. I didn't tell my family. I told Leon. I told 2 guys from work. That was it. The first 6 weeks were peaceful. I painted the living room, replaced the water heater, and built a workbench in the garage. I bought a used dining table from Facebook Marketplace and ate my first dinner there alone. Frozen lasagna, paper plate, no music. Best meal I'd had in years. Then Jason found out. I still don't know how. Maybe a mutual friend saw my moving post. Maybe Rachel heard through someone at the bank. Maybe my mother had been checking county property records. All I know is Jason texted me on a Thursday night. "Heard you bought a house." 3 bedrooms? I didn't answer. 10 minutes later. "Call me. It's important." I blocked the number. Saturday morning, my mother left a voicemail. "Your brother is going through a difficult situation. He may need somewhere to stay for a little while. I know you 2 have had disagreements, but this could be a chance to repair things." A little while. With Jason, that phrase usually meant until a judge, landlord, or girlfriend physically removed him. I deleted the voicemail. Sunday afternoon, I was washing mud off my driveway when the SUV turned onto my street. My mother was in front. My father sat behind her. Jason was driving. Rachel was beside him. That combination alone should have warned me. They parked across half my driveway. Jason got out first and opened the rear hatch. My mother walked toward me smiling too brightly. We tried calling. I noticed. She looked around the property. This is nice. Why is Rachel here? My ex-wife stepped out slowly. She was wearing sunglasses even though the sky was overcast. Hi, Evan. I didn't respond. Jason pulled out 2 suitcases, then a plastic storage bin, then another. What are you doing? I asked. He didn't look at me. Just bringing in essentials. No, you're not. My mother stepped between us. Jason lost his apartment. Then he should find another one. He has nowhere to go. He has parents. My father finally got out. Our place isn't suitable. You have 4 bedrooms. We need quiet. I nodded. So do I. Rachel crossed her arms. This doesn't have to be hostile. I looked at her. Why are you here? She lowered her sunglasses. Because I need somewhere to stay too. For a second, I honestly thought I'd misheard her. You're asking to live in my house? Temporarily. Why? Her expression tightened. Colin and I broke up. There it was. Not regret. Not accountability. A housing problem. My mother touched my arm. Rachel has been through enough. I stepped back. That offended her. She cheated on me. She made mistakes. She left me with $11,000 in debt. You recovered. I stared at her. That sentence explained my whole family better than anything else could have. I recovered. Therefore, what they'd done no longer counted. Jason carried a box toward the porch. I stepped in front of him. Put it back. He laughed. Don't be dramatic. This is my house. Yeah, and you have room. I said no. My father's voice hardened. Evan, we did not raise you to abandon family. I looked at all 4 of them. My father, who hadn't offered me a couch. My mother, who called betrayal a complication. My brother, who viewed every boundary as a negotiation. My ex-wife, who had returned only because the man she chose over me stopped paying her rent. Then I noticed something taped to the side of one of Jason's boxes. A printed change of address form. My address was already written on it. He hadn't come for a few nights. He had already started moving in on paper. I took out my phone. Jason smirked. Who are you calling? The police. My mother's face changed. You wouldn't. I looked at the luggage spread across my lawn. Then at Rachel. Then back at my mother. You all counted on that. I dialed. And for the first time in my life, nobody in my family knew what to do next. The police arrived 8 minutes later. That was enough time for my mother to cycle through disbelief, anger, tears, and finally, the cold silence she used when she wanted everyone to know she was the injured party. Jason stopped unloading boxes, but he didn't put anything back. Rachel moved closer to the SUV and folded her arms. My father stood in the driveway with both hands on his hips, shaking his head like I'd failed some kind of test. A patrol car pulled up behind Jason's vehicle. 2 officers got out. The older one looked around at the luggage, then at me. You the homeowner? Yes, Jason cut in. He's my brother. The officer didn't even look at him. I asked the homeowner. I showed my license and pulled up the closing documents on my phone. The officer glanced at them, then pointed toward the boxes. Did you give anyone permission to move in? No. My mother stepped forward. This is a family misunderstanding? The younger officer looked at her. Ma'am, are you on the deed? No, but do you live here? No. Then it's not your decision. That shut her up for almost 5 seconds. Jason tried a different approach. I mailed some things here already. The older officer turned to him. Do you receive mail at this address? I submitted a change form. Does the homeowner know? Jason looked at me. No. The officer's expression changed. Not dramatically. Just enough to let Jason know he'd made the situation worse. You don't establish residence by writing someone else's address on a form. Jason's face tightened. I'm not trying to steal the house. I didn't say you were. The officer pointed at the SUV. Load the property back into the vehicle. My mother started crying again. Not quiet tears. The performance kind. This is unbelievable. We're talking about children here. I looked around. There are no children here. Jason has a son. Who lives with his mother? That's not the point. It seems important. Jason shoved one of the boxes into the back of the SUV. You always do this. I stared at him. Do what? Act better than everyone. That's not what's happening. You bought one house, and suddenly you think you're untouchable. The officer stepped between us before I could answer. Keep loading. Jason muttered something under his breath, but obeyed. Rachel hadn't said a word since the police arrived. That bothered me. She usually hated silence, unless it benefited her. While Jason and my father repacked the SUV, the younger officer walked with me toward the porch. You want them formally trespassed? I looked back at my family. My mother was glaring at me now. Jason was throwing boxes harder than necessary. Rachel had taken off her sunglasses. Her expression wasn't embarrassed. It was calculating. Yes, I said. The officer nodded. He took down everyone's names and explained that returning without permission could result in arrest. My mother acted like he'd threatened prison over a holiday disagreement. My father said nothing. Jason called me a coward. Rachel finally spoke when she reached the passenger door. You're making a mistake. I almost laughed. Which one? Turning everyone against you. I looked at the people standing beside her. They were already against me. She got into the SUV. Before Jason drove away, my mother lowered the window. When you calm down, call us. I didn't answer. The SUV disappeared around the corner. The officer stayed a few more minutes. The older one handed me a case number. Change your locks if anyone has ever had access to your keys. No one has. Install cameras. Already planned. Good. He looked toward the street. Family situations can escalate faster than people expect. I thanked him. After they left, I carried the garden hose into the garage and sat on the workbench. The house was quiet again, but it no longer felt private. They knew where I lived. They knew the layout. They knew I had extra rooms. More importantly, they believed access to my life was something they could negotiate. I called Leon. He answered on the second ring. You settled in? My family tried to move into my house. There was a pause. All of them? My brother and ex-wife. My parents supervised. Leon laughed once, then realized I wasn't joking. You need cameras. I know. I'll come over. You don't have to. I have a ladder and no plans. An hour later, Leon showed up with 2 security cameras, a drill, and a bag of tacos. That was friendship. No lecture, no guilt. Just tools and food. We installed 1 camera above the front door and another facing the driveway. While we worked, I told him everything. The surprise arrival, the boxes, the change of address form, Rachel needing a fresh start. Leon tightened a screw and shook his head. They thought you'd fold. They usually would have been right. But not now. No. He climbed down the ladder. What changed? I looked at the house. I got tired of paying for peace I never received. Leon nodded, like that made perfect sense. By evening, the cameras were active. Motion alerts went straight to my phone. I changed the garage code anyway. Then I called the post office and flagged unauthorized mail forwarding. The clerk told me someone had already submitted a request using my address. Jason's name. Effective the following week. I canceled it. That detail stayed with me. The boxes might have been theater. The paperwork wasn't. Jason had planned to establish himself in my house before I knew anything was happening. That night, I slept badly. Every car door outside woke me. Every notification made me reach for my phone. Nothing happened. Monday morning, I went to work early. The plant had a conveyor motor failure, which was useful because broken machinery was easier to understand than family. By 10, I'd almost stopped thinking about Sunday. Then the receptionist called my radio. Evan, there's someone here asking for you. Who? She says she's your wife. I closed my eyes. Ex-wife. Should I send her back? No. I walked to the lobby. Rachel was sitting in one of the plastic chairs, holding a large envelope. She stood when she saw me. You blocked me. Yes. I needed to talk. You were told not to come to my house. This isn't your house. It's my workplace. She glanced toward the receptionist. Can we speak somewhere private? No. Her jaw tightened. I'm trying to handle this like an adult. You came to my home with luggage because I had nowhere else to go. That isn't my responsibility. I know. She said it quietly enough to surprise me. Then she held out the envelope. What's this? Documents. What kind? Financial. I didn't take it. Rachel lowered her voice. Colin used my name to open accounts. For a moment, I said nothing. The irony was almost too obvious. You opened one in mine. I know. He emptied my savings. I'm sorry. I looked at her. Are you apologizing to me or explaining why you need money? Her eyes filled. I'm trying to tell you I finally understand. No. You understand what it feels like when it happens to you. She flinched. Fair, but accurate. She pushed the envelope toward me again. There's something in here you need to see. I don't need anything from you. Yes, you do. Her voice changed. The sadness disappeared. Something sharper replaced it. Your brother has been using your information. I stared at her. What information? Tax documents, employment history, old account numbers. How would he have those? She looked away. Because your mother gave them to him. The lobby suddenly felt too bright. What did he do? Rachel opened the envelope and removed a credit report. My name was printed across the top. 3 recent inquiries appeared beneath it. One for a personal loan, one for a credit card, one for a home improvement line of credit, all submitted within the last 6 weeks. I looked at Rachel. Where did you get this? Jason showed Colin. Why? He wanted help getting approved. For what? Rachel's answer came slowly. He wasn't just planning to move into your house. She pointed at the final page. He was trying to borrow against it. I read the application address, my address, estimated property value, my purchase price, employer, salary. Everything was correct. Almost everything. The applicant's email belonged to Jason. The phone number belonged to my mother. My signature at the bottom was fake. For the first time since buying the house, I understood why everyone had arrived together. They weren't furious because I refused to help. They were scared I'd discover what they'd already started. I read the credit report 3 times before I realized I was holding my breath. 3 loan applications, 2 credit cards, 1 home equity inquiry. Every one of them had my name on it. Every one of them had been submitted after I bought the house. Only one thing was different: the signature. Whoever forged it had done a decent job. Not perfect. Just good enough that a busy loan officer probably wouldn't look twice. I looked up at Rachel. "Why are you showing me this?" She didn't answer immediately. "Because I was there." "Meaning?" "Jason came over one night." "To your apartment?" She nodded. "He brought a folder." "What was in it?" "Copies of your tax returns, pay stubs, the closing paperwork for the house." I felt my stomach tighten. "How would he have any of that?" She looked embarrassed. "Your mom." For a second, I honestly thought she'd said the wrong name. "My mother gave him my financial records." "I didn't see her hand them over, but Jason said she kept copies from when you were refinancing after the divorce." I remembered that. My mother had insisted on helping me organize paperwork because, according to her, I was too stressed to think straight. I'd forgotten she'd scanned everything. Apparently she hadn't forgotten. What was Jason trying to do? Rachel took a slow breath. "He said banks trust homeowners more than renters. So, he wanted to use your credit until he got back on his feet." "My credit. My house. My identity," she nodded. I argued with him. I couldn't help it. I laughed. Not because anything was funny. Because hearing Rachel claim the moral high ground after everything we'd been through felt almost unreal. "You argued with him?" "Yes. The woman who opened a credit card in my name." "I know. You don't get to be shocked." "I'm not." She looked directly at me. "I'm telling you because I finally know what it feels like when someone treats your future like it belongs to them." That landed harder than I expected. Not because it erased what she'd done, because it didn't. For the first time since our divorce, Rachel wasn't asking me for anything. She was handing me evidence. "Did Jason submit these applications himself?" "I think Colin helped." "The boyfriend?" "My ex." She corrected herself quietly. "He used to work in auto financing." That explained the paperwork. People who process loans every day know exactly which boxes matter. "What happened?" "They got rejected." "Why?" "One lender wanted to verify employment. Another wanted to confirm the phone number attached to my payroll records. Jason had guessed. He guessed wrong. So they moved to Plan B." I looked at her. "Moving into the house." She nodded. "If he established residency, it would have been easier to claim he lived there. And easier to explain why mail kept arriving. Everything suddenly connected. The boxes, the address change, the urgency. None of it had been about helping family. It had been about creating paperwork." I thanked Rachel for the documents. She looked surprised. "That's it? What were you expecting?" "I don't know." "Forgiveness?" She looked away. "No. Neither do I." She picked up her purse. "I really am sorry." "I believe you." Her eyes met mine. "You do?" "I believe you're sorry your life fell apart." She didn't argue. "But that's different from being sorry for what you chose?" She nodded once, then walked toward the exit. Halfway to the door, she stopped. "Evan?" "What?" "Change your online banking password." I frowned. "Why?" "Jason knows your birthday." "So do a lot of people." "He knows your first dog's name." "My mother's maiden name." "The street you grew up on." "Every answer to every security question." Then she left. I spent the next hour doing something I never imagined I'd have to do. I froze my credit with all 3 reporting agencies. Changed every password I could remember. Updated 2-factor authentication. called my mortgage lender. The woman in the fraud department listened quietly. When I finished, she asked, "Has anyone else ever had access to your financial records?" I answered without thinking, "My family." There was a short silence. "I'd recommend adding a verbal security password to your account." I didn't know that was possible. It is now. By the time I finished, half my lunch break was gone. I returned to the plant feeling like I'd spent the morning cleaning up after a burglary. Except nothing had been stolen. Not yet. That evening, Leon came over again. I spread the paperwork across the dining table. He whistled. "They really went all in. I think they assumed I'd never check." "You would have caught it eventually." "Eventually isn't the point." He picked up one application. "They estimated your house value almost 40 grand higher than you paid." I looked closer. He was right. The appraisal number had been inflated. Why does that matter? It increases borrowing limits. I leaned back. "They weren't asking for a small loan." Leon nodded. "They were trying to pull equity. But I've barely owned the place. They only needed one careless lender." The front door camera chimed. Motion detected. We both looked at my phone. My parents, standing on the porch. No Jason, no Rachel. Just the two of them. My mother was holding a casserole dish. Leon laughed. "Weaponized lasagna." I smiled despite myself. "Stay." "I'm not hiding." "You don't have to." "I know. But I want to hear this." I opened the front door without inviting them inside. "What do you want?" My mother lifted the dish. "I made dinner." "No thanks." She looked past me. "Can we talk?" "We are." My father cleared his throat. "Not out here." "Out here works." My mother forced a smile. "Jason made mistakes." "I know." "He didn't mean any harm." I stared at her. "He forged loan documents." "He was desperate." "He tried to borrow against my house." "He wasn't thinking clearly." I looked at my father. He finally spoke. "Family shouldn't involve lawyers." "I agree. So let's solve this ourselves." I almost laughed. "You've had months to solve it yourselves." "We didn't know." "You absolutely knew." My mother's smile disappeared. "Rachel told you." "She did." My father looked genuinely confused. Why would she do that? Because for once she decided to tell the truth. That sentence hit both of them harder than I expected. My mother set the casserole on the porch. "You've always believed strangers before your own family?" I shook my head. "No. I believed evidence." Her face hardened. "If you report Jason?" She stopped. "If I report him?" "He's your brother." I looked at the casserole sitting between us. Then at the two people who had spent my entire life teaching me that keeping peace mattered more than telling the truth. I've spent years cleaning up other people's decisions. I kept my voice calm. "I'm done." My father's expression changed. Not angry, worried. "What have you already done?" Before I could answer, my phone buzzed. It was the detective from the county fraud unit. I had left a voicemail earlier that afternoon without expecting a call back so quickly. I answered. "This is Evan." The detective didn't waste time. "Mr. Brooks, we've reviewed the documents you emailed." I looked at my parents while he continued. "We're going to need you to come in tomorrow morning." My mother took one step toward me. "Who is that?" I never looked away from her. The person Jason should have been worried about instead of me. Then I ended the call. My father slowly looked at the casserole on the porch. Neither of them reached for it. For the first time in my life, they realized this wasn't another family argument. it had become a criminal investigation? The detective's office wasn't what I expected. No interrogation room, no one-way mirror, just a conference table, 2 filing cabinets, and a coffee maker that looked older than I was. Detective Sarah Mitchell walked in carrying a thin folder. She shook my hand. "I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances." "I wish we weren't." She sat down across from me. "I've reviewed everything you sent. The loan applications, the forged signature, the change of address request." She tapped the folder. "Unfortunately, this isn't the first complaint involving your brother. That got my attention immediately." "What do you mean?" She opened the folder. "There were 2 previous reports." I frowned. "Against Jason?" She nodded. "Neither resulted in charges." "Why not?" "The first involved a former girlfriend. He opened a store credit account using her information." "What happened?" "She declined to cooperate after they reconciled." That sounded exactly like Jason. Promised to change. Apologized just enough. Wait until people were too embarrassed to admit what happened. "The second?" "A former roommate. He claimed Jason forged his name on utility paperwork." "Was it true?" "We couldn't prove it." She slid copies of both reports across the table. Different names. Different years. Same pattern. Someone else carried the consequences. Jason moved on. I leaned back in my chair. "My parents know." Detective Mitchell looked at me. "You sound certain." "They've spent years cleaning up after him." She nodded slowly. "Families often confuse protecting someone with helping them." "I don't." "No." She smiled faintly. "I don't think you do." She spent the next 30 minutes explaining how identity fraud investigations usually worked. Every application left digital records. Every login had an IP address. Every document carried metadata. People imagined financial fraud was sophisticated. Most of the time, it wasn't. They always leave something behind. She looked at me. "Do you still have access to the envelope your ex-wife gave you?" "I brought it." She examined the papers carefully, then stopped at one application. "This signature." "What about it?" "It wasn't traced." "You can tell?" "It hesitates." She pointed toward the last letter in my name. "Whoever wrote this stopped twice." I looked closer. Tiny pauses, barely visible. "But," she continued, "someone else completed the personal information." "Meaning?" "I think 2 people filled this out." Jason hadn't worked alone. When I got home that afternoon, the casserole was still sitting on my porch. Nobody had come back for it. I carried it straight to the trash. Not because I hated my mother's cooking. Because I was done accepting gifts that arrived attached to guilt. Halfway through taking out the garbage, my phone buzzed. Front door camera. Motion detected. Not my parents. Not Jason. A man wearing a navy polo shirt stood on my porch, holding a clipboard. I answered through the camera speaker. "Can I help you?" He looked up. "Mr. Brooks?" "Yes." "I'm with Midwest Community Bank." That made me stop. "What about?" "I need your signature confirming cancellation of a home equity application." "I already canceled that over the phone." "Yes." He checked his clipboard. "But company policy requires written confirmation." "I'll come down." When I opened the door, he looked relieved. "Glad we caught this." "Caught what?" He handed me the paperwork. "The application almost funded." I frowned. "What?" "It reached final approval yesterday." Every muscle in my shoulders tightened. "I thought it was denied." "So did I." He pointed toward one page. "It was resubmitted." Different date, different loan officer, same forged signature. Loan amount $98,000. I stared at it. How close? If today's verification appointment happened, he hesitated. The funds would have been released tomorrow. My stomach dropped. Verification appointment? Yes. The representative looked confused. Your brother scheduled it. I looked up. He what? He identified himself as your financial advisor. For a second, I couldn't speak. He wasn't planning to borrow money. The banker slowly shook his head. He was planning to steal it. That evening, Detective Mitchell called again. We traced the application. So did you find him? We found the computer. Where? She paused. Your parents' house. I closed my eyes. Not Jason's apartment. Not a public library. My parents' home. The IP address matches their internet service. I sat down slowly. So they knew. We'll determine exactly who knew. But, yes, the application originated there. After we hung up, I just sat in the dark living room. The betrayal wasn't that Jason had tried to use my identity. I'd almost expected that by now. The betrayal was realizing my parents' dining room table, the same table where we'd celebrated birthdays, had become the place where they planned to steal my house. The next morning, just before leaving for work, my phone rang again. It was my father. I almost ignored it. Instead, I answered. His voice sounded older than I remembered. Evan. What? The police were here. I know. They searched the house. I know. They took Jason's laptop. I know. Long silence. Finally, he quietly asked, Are you happy now? I looked out the kitchen window toward the garage I'd worked so hard to build. No. Another silence. Then I asked the question I'd carried for years. When did you stop seeing me as your son? And start seeing me as the solution to everyone else's problems? He didn't answer. Instead, he hung up. That was the last conversation we had before Jason was arrested 2 days later. And when the detective called to tell me they had finally searched his email account, she said they'd found something none of us had been expecting. It wasn't just my identity he'd been trying to steal. There was a spreadsheet, a list of names, loan amounts, social security numbers, and my name was only the first one on it. I didn't believe the detective at first. A spreadsheet? Yes. Detective Mitchell's voice stayed calm. Multiple names. How many? We're still counting. I leaned against the kitchen counter. My brother? He created it. By himself? There was a pause. We're not prepared to answer that yet. Which meant they already suspected the answer. When can I see it? After the forensic team finishes documenting everything. I thanked her and ended the call. For several minutes, I just stood there, staring out the window. I'd spent days thinking this was about my house. Then I thought it was about my identity. Now it sounded like I'd accidentally uncovered something much bigger. Jason was arrested Thursday afternoon. I found out from Leon. Not the police, not my parents. Leon called while I was replacing a motor control panel at work. You busy? A little. I figured. He lowered his voice. I just drove past your parents' place. So? There are 3 patrol cars outside. My stomach tightened. What happened? They've got Jason in handcuffs. I didn't answer. Leon waited. Finally, he said, You okay? I don't know. That was the truth. I wasn't happy. I wasn't sad. Mostly, I was tired. The local news picked up the story that evening. They didn't use names. Just a short report. A 38-year-old Dayton man has been arrested in connection with an ongoing financial fraud investigation. involving forged loan applications and identity theft. I watched exactly 30 seconds before turning the television off. Half an hour later, my mother called. For the first time since I'd known her, she sounded frightened. "You need to fix this." I closed my eyes. "I didn't cause it." "He's your brother." "I know." "He made mistakes. He committed crimes." "You can tell them you don't want to press charges." "I can't." "You won't." There was the difference. She still believed this was my decision, as if detectives spent weeks gathering evidence, only to ask victims how they felt afterward. "It's out of my hands." "No." She raised her voice. "You always have a choice." "I did." "What choice?" "I chose not to lie for him." Silence. Then she quietly asked, "Do you hate your own family that much?" That question would have destroyed me a year earlier. Now, it just made me sad. "I don't hate anyone." "Then help him." "I spent 15 years helping him." I looked around my living room. My help is one of the reasons he believed he'd never face consequences. She started crying. Not dramatically, just quietly. "I don't know what happened to us." "I do." She stopped. "We confused love with rescue. And every time you rescued Jason, you taught him someone else would pay." She didn't answer. Neither of us had anything left to say. The following Monday, Detective Mitchell invited me back to the station. This time, the folder waiting on the table was much thicker. She opened it carefully. "We've identified 11 victims." I blinked. 11? She nodded. "My name wasn't the only one?" "No." She slid the spreadsheet across the table. Each row contained a name, date of birth, estimated credit score, employer, mortgage information, loan potential. I recognized 3 people immediately. My cousin, an elderly neighbor who'd helped Jason after a car accident years earlier, a former coworker. Everyone on the list had one thing in common. They trusted him. "How long?" I asked. "Almost 4 years." 4 years. Long before I'd bought my house. Long before my divorce. This hadn't started because Jason was desperate. Desperate people make bad decisions. This took planning. Another page contained email exchanges recovered from his laptop. One message stopped me cold. "Mom says Evan finally bought a place. If we move fast, we can use the equity before he figures anything out." The reply came from an address I didn't recognize. "Does he still trust her?" Jason answered. "Enough." I looked up. "Who sent this?" "We're working on it." "You don't know?" "We know." She closed the folder. "We're confirming involvement." I understood. There was another suspect. That evening, I finally cleaned out the spare bedroom. Not because anyone was moving in. Because I'd been leaving it untouched, almost like I expected someone else to decide what happened there. I carried old boxes into the garage. Halfway through, I found a photo album from my childhood. Most of the pictures showed Jason and me fishing with Dad, building tree forts, playing Little League. He hadn't always been like this. Or maybe he had. Maybe everyone simply laughed at the small lies until they became expensive ones. The last picture in the album showed my 8th birthday. Jason had one arm around my shoulder. Mom was smiling behind us. Dad was holding the cake. It looked like a normal family. I realized something then. Families rarely notice the exact moment unhealthy patterns begin. They only notice when those patterns become impossible to ignore. A week later, the prosecutor offered Jason a plea agreement. He accepted. Not because he suddenly felt guilty. Because the digital evidence was overwhelming. Phone records, bank logins, forged documents, deleted emails recovered from his laptop. Everything pointed in one direction. He admitted to identity fraud, forgery, attempted financial theft. He never looked at me during the hearing, not once. My parents sat behind him. My mother cried through most of it. My father looked 20 years older. When the judge asked if anyone wished to make a statement before sentencing, I stood. The courtroom became quiet. I looked at Jason, then at the judge. I'm not here because my brother asked me for help. I paused. I'm here because he stopped believing other people had the right to say no. I glanced toward my parents. And somewhere along the way, our family started believing the same thing. Nobody interrupted. I continued. I don't want revenge. I don't need an apology. I just want today to be the first day nobody else pays for his decisions. The judge nodded once. Jason finally looked at me. There wasn't anger in his face. There wasn't regret either. Only surprise. As if he genuinely hadn't expected anyone to stop him. He received 3 years in state prison, followed by probation and full restitution to every identified victim. It wasn't a dramatic ending. Real life rarely is. 3 months later, I was back in my garage finishing the workbench I'd started before any of this happened. Leon stopped by with coffee. He looked around. Quiet again. Yeah, he smiled. You keeping the spare bedroom? I looked toward the hallway. For now. What of your family calls? I picked up my drill. They know the answer. And what's that? I smiled for the first time in weeks. They can ask. But they don't get to decide. That little brick house never became a place where people took what they needed. It became the first place in my life where peace didn't depend on saying yes. And it turned out that was worth protecting more than any house ever could be. I didn't expect to hear from my father again. Not after the sentencing, not after the courtroom, not after he walked past me without saying a word. 3 weeks later, a plain white envelope showed up in my mailbox. No return address, just my name written in my father's handwriting. Inside was a single house key, the key to my parents' home. There was also a short note. Your mother doesn't know I'm sending this. I think it's time you knew everything. Underneath was an address, not theirs. A storage unit across town. I almost threw the note away. Instead, I drove there Saturday morning. The storage facility manager checked my ID, compared it to paperwork already on file, and handed me a temporary access card. Unit 214. Paid through the end of the month. Who rented it? He looked at the paperwork. Your father. That surprised me. Not because he'd rented a storage unit, because he'd never kept anything from my mother. Unit 214 wasn't full. Just one metal shelf, 3 plastic bins, a filing cabinet, and an old desktop computer. The top bin was labeled Jason. Inside were folders going back nearly 15 years. Unpaid loans, collection notices, eviction warnings, traffic citations, letters from employers, applications filled out halfway and abandoned. Every time Jason got into trouble, my father had quietly collected the paperwork. Almost like he was keeping a history no one else wanted to admit existed. The second bin was worse. It contained checks, bank statements, copies of money transfers. I recognized my own name over and over. Deposit for Jason's apartment, truck repair, attorney retainer, emergency loan. My father had written notes beside almost every receipt. Don't tell your mother how much Evan covered. Jason promised this is the last time. Need to repay Evan somehow. The repayments never came. The filing cabinet held something I wasn't expecting. Letters, dozens of them, everyone addressed to Jason, none mailed. My father had written them over the years, instead of saying the words out loud. One stood out. It was dated almost 6 years earlier. Son, every time we ask Evan to fix your problems, we teach you that his life belongs to everyone except him. I don't know how to stop your mother from protecting you. I'm beginning to realize I'm protecting both of you from the truth. I sat there reading that paragraph 3 times. He had known, long before I did. He simply hadn't done anything. When I got home that afternoon, my father was sitting on my front porch, alone, no mother, no surprise moving truck, no casserole, just him. I figured you'd go. I did, he nodded. I couldn't throw any of it away. I unlocked the front door. You want coffee? I'd like that. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Leon and I had spread out loan applications weeks earlier. Dad looked older than I remembered. His shoulders slumped. His hands shook slightly when he wrapped them around the coffee mug. I failed both my sons. I didn't answer. I failed Jason because I rescued him. He looked down. And I failed you because I expected you to survive it. That sentence landed harder than any apology could have. For years, he continued, your mother believed helping Jason meant asking you. I told myself we'd pay you back someday. He laughed quietly. Then someday became 10 years. I looked at him. Why now? Because prison changed nothing. What do you mean? I visited him. Dad rubbed his forehead. He still says everyone betrayed him. He blames you. He blames me. He blames the bank, the detective, the judge. He hasn't blamed himself once. I wasn't surprised. Not anymore. Dad reached into his jacket pocket. I sold my truck. I frowned. Why? He placed a cashier's check on the table. It wasn't enough to repay everything I'd ever spent helping Jason. Not even close. But it wasn't a symbolic amount either. It was almost $20,000. I can't accept this. You can. It's your retirement. So was your savings. He pushed the check toward me. I'm not buying forgiveness. I know. I'm paying a debt. For the first time in years, I believed he meant it. My mother never apologized. She called twice after Dad visited. Both times she insisted Jason had been treated unfairly. Both times I ended the conversation after a few minutes. Some people don't change because the consequences belong to someone else. That was a lesson I'd learned too many times. Dad, though, kept showing up. Not often. Just enough. Sometimes we'd drink coffee on the back patio. Sometimes he'd help me with yard work. Sometimes we'd sit in complete silence. Oddly enough, those quiet afternoons did more to repair our relationship than 100 emotional conversations ever could. Almost a year after everything happened, Detective Mitchell stopped by my house. Not officially. She was driving through the neighborhood after another case. I figured I'd check in. Everything okay? She smiled. Actually, yes. She handed me a thin envelope. Inside was the final restitution report. Every fraudulent account had been closed. Every victim had their credit restored. Every dollar the court could recover had been returned. Not because Jason suddenly became responsible, because the legal system had finally forced him to be. Before leaving, she looked around the house. You know, most people think this case was about identity theft. It wasn't? She shook her head. It was about boundaries. I laughed. I guess you're right. You were the first person who ever told him no. She got into her car. And sometimes, that's exactly where accountability begins. These days, the house is still quiet. The garage is finished. The workbench finally has every tool in its place. Leon still comes over most Saturdays. We grill burgers, watch football, argue about which truck brands are overrated. Normal things. The spare bedroom is still empty. Not because I'm saving it for someone. Because I finally understand something that took me 35 years to learn. Just because you have room in your house doesn't mean everyone deserves a key. Family isn't measured by who shares your last name. It's measured by who respects your front door after you say no. And the day I called the police wasn't the day I lost my family. It was the day I finally stopped losing myself.